Right guys, so before we start, I've got to say the Omega Seamaster, it is probably my best looking watch, my most well built watch, my most iconic watch, definitely the most popular watch on Instagram for photos and things like that. But I am a watch addict and the next 5 or 10 minutes are going to be spent with me complaining about the Omega Seamaster and where they've gone wrong. I'm Andrew and I'm a watch addict. Right, so I've had this watch for a few weeks now. I've worn it for quite a considerable time, but the last 3 or 4 weeks I haven't worn it much. And I mentioned in a previous video that I'm bringing my collection down to 39-40mm, and this just doesn't sit in there. Size is one of the issues, which is very subjective to different people's wrist sizes. I get that. And I've got to say that this watch, the looks of this watch are absolutely fantastic. It is a gorgeous, iconic looking watch. I think the lume markers are absolutely stunning, whether they're showing lume or just in natural light. I think they absolutely are gorgeous. The movement again is something, an improvement from the previous model. I think that's a really good thing. The bezel action as well, which came in for a bit of a hassle on the previous generation. They've updated the bezel action, and again, that's really solid. And the date window, you can't complain about where they've put the date window now. So don't get me wrong, there is a lot of good things about this watch, and there'll be people out there thinking I'm talking absolute bollocks, criticising the Seamaster. And it is a bit like that because I'm basically going to be complaining about an iconic watch. But I think they've got a few things wrong. They have. And let's start with the very first thing. It's the size. I think the size of the watch is just simply too big, and I know it's only from 1mm from the previous generation, 41mm, but I think they should have sticked to that size. I think it was a perfect, ideal size. So to make it a little bit bigger is contemporary. All watches are getting bigger. The Rolex Submariner's got bigger in recent years, but I think that's a mistake. I do. And the second big one is the weight. It is a chunky, heavy watch. Again, that is subjective. People won't be bothered by that, but for me personally, the weight of the watch, you do start to notice it after wearing it for a full day. So I think that's a bit of a negative, unfortunately. Right, let's get on with some serious critique of this watch. Mentioned a couple of things to start with, but one of the really bugbears for me is the bracelet. I think it's chunky. I think it's unrefined. I think it's not got much drape or refinement. I just think it doesn't do well. And I like the mix of the polish and the brushed. I think it gives a good mix of style, and it's good for all sort of different occasions. But ultimately, the chunkiness, the unrefinedness, it doesn't taper, which is massive. They can do so much better as well, because these guys can do so much better with bracelets. If you try on the new Speedmaster and the new vintage-inspired Seamaster that they've got out there, those watches have bracelets to die for. And I cringe saying it, but they are Rolex quality. They've got great drape, great taper, and the clasp. Oh, guys, a lot of you out there will be complaining about the Omega Seamaster clasp. That is for sure. So the clasp is undeniably chunky. It's massive, and because of the lack of the taper, the clasp has got to be bigger even still, which is just a double whammy. But on top of that, it's actually thick that way as well. It's a really thick, chunky clasp. Massive that way, massively thick that way, and it just feels like a massive wedge of cheese under your arm. And you could argue that it makes for the balance of the watch, but for me, it's unrefined, it's too clunky, it's too big, and yes, it does its job, but I don't think it does it very well, unfortunately. Now, believe it or not, what I'm about to say, after all my months and years and whinging about the ultimate search for micro adjustment, the Omega Seamaster has got too much micro adjustment. I know it's hard to believe, but it has. It's just got simply too much micro adjustment. Now, you could argue that's a good thing because, hot or cold, rain or shine, you're going to get a good fit. But ultimately, when it's maximised out as well, that actually it's quite an unsightly thing that when you've got the full extension of the micro adjustment, I think it's actually unsightly. So it's not a good thing. So the clasp, massive in size, the lack of taper, too much micro adjustment, believe it or not. All these things add to a watch that for me, it's a shame, but it doesn't work, and it should. The Omega Seamaster should be one of the most. It is one of the most iconic watches, but all the ingredients of the watch should mingle together to make the perfect watch, the perfect Omega watch, and it doesn't. So it's really disappointing. Dare I say it, really? So what could they do to make this watch better? Well, this is again totally subjective, totally what I think. You might think I'm right, you might think I'm wrong, but if it was me in research and development at Omega, I'd have kept it at a 41mm. I'd have maybe widened the lugs. I'd have definitely had a taper. I think the bracelet needs to be thinner that way. It's quite a thick bracelet as well. So I thin the bracelet out, and in turn, with a taper, even if it is a 1 or 2mm taper, in turn the clasp won't seem as wide and as big on your wrist. Less micro adjustment, believe it or not, would make a massive thing as well. So there it is. I've said all I've got to say about the Omega Seamaster and the complaints I have. It is on the chopping block. I am considering selling it. Would I buy another? Yeah, I would. I would have another. I'm not going to be in a rush to buy one though, because disappointment's a strong word. But yeah, unfortunately, it's just not for me at this time. Let me know what you think, guys. I'm Andrew, and I'm a watch addict.